Martin Greene sat on the porch of his modest suburban home, sipping lukewarm coffee from his favorite chipped mug. At 57, Martin had grown accustomed to the routines of a life built on quiet consistency. The house, a relic of 1980s design, had seen better days but remained a comfortable haven for him and his wife, Ellen. The couple had been married for over 30 years, their union weathered by the ebbs and flows of life. Ellen was 55, with soft silver streaks waving through her chestnut hair. She had an air of grace, the kind that comes with time and resilience. Once a schoolteacher, Ellen had retired early, citing burnout, though Martin suspected the underlying reasons were more complex. The two had never been blessed with children, a fact that had caused strain in their earlier years, but eventually became an unspoken acceptance between them. They filled their lives with hobbies, gardening for Ellen and woodworking for Martin, and socialized occasionally with neighbors, though neither was particularly outgoing. Financially, the Greenes were stable, if not affluent. Martin had spent decades working as an accountant for a small firm, a career that provided steady, if uninspiring, income. Their lives were simple, their pleasures modest. A shared love of classical music, evening walks, and reruns of old television shows. They were the kind of couple who could sit in silence and find comfort in each other's presence. Lately, however, Martin had sensed a change in Ellen. She had become restless, her days filled with errands that seemed to stretch longer than necessary. She'd taken to riding the local bus instead of driving their car, claiming she enjoyed the slower pace and chance encounters. Martin didn't think much of it at first. After all, they'd each developed quirks over the years, and Ellen's were no stranger than his habit of meticulously polishing his tools on Saturday mornings. But then there was the laughter. Ellen had always been reserved, her humor subtle and infrequent. Now, she returned from her errands with a lightness he hadn't seen in years, her eyes crinkling with joy at jokes she wouldn't share. She mentioned the bus driver, a man named Jack, more often than seemed necessary. "He's quite the character," she'd say, or, "Jack has the funniest stories about his passengers." Martin tried to dismiss the unease building in his chest. At his age, he reasoned, it was natural to feel insecure from time to time. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting between them, like a faint tremor beneath the surface of their otherwise solid marriage. One evening, as they sat together watching television, Martin decided to broach the subject. "You've been taking the bus a lot lately," he remarked, keeping his tone light. "What's so special about it?" Ellen looked at him, her smile faint but warm. "Oh, it's just nice to get out and see people. Jack's a good conversationalist, and it's refreshing to hear about someone else's day for a change." "Well, as long as you're enjoying yourself," Martin replied, forcing a grin. He didn't press further, unwilling to seem petty or suspicious. That night, as Ellen slept soundly beside him, Martin stared at the ceiling, his mind racing. He reminded himself of their years together, the trials they'd overcome, and the love that had seen them through it all. Yet, a sliver of doubt remained, a whisper in the dark that he couldn't ignore. The next day, as he sanded a piece of oak in his workshop, Martin resolved to pay more attention. Perhaps he was overthinking, but if there was a storm brewing on the horizon, he wanted to be ready. He owed it to himself, and to the life they'd built, to understand what was happening. For now, though, he focused on the wood beneath his hands, letting its grain guide him as he worked. It was a small comfort, but one he'd take as the first signs of uncertainty began to ripple through his quiet world. "I've always considered myself a man of routine. The predictable patterns of my life brought a sense of order, a kind of solace that I clung to more tightly as the years slipped by. But lately, a strange undercurrent has disrupted that familiar rhythm, an unease I can neither name nor ignore." Ellen's newfound enthusiasm for her errands became impossible to overlook. Each day, she left the house with a spring in her step, her face alight with an energy I hadn't seen in years. When she returned, she'd be brimming with stories, not about the groceries or the books she'd picked up, but about the people she encountered. Or, more accurately, about one person, the bus driver, Jack. His name began to crop up in her stories with a frequency that left me cold. She spoke of his wit, his kindness, the way he seemed to know everyone on his route. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the harmless chatter of someone enjoying a bit of novelty in her days. After all, Ellen had spent years surrounded by the same walls, living the same quiet life. Maybe she simply craved variety. But the doubt lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. I found myself watching her more closely, noticing the small changes that, on their own, might have meant nothing. The way she lingered in front of the mirror a little longer each morning. The way her voice softened when she mentioned his name. The way her laughter felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. I never thought of myself as a jealous man, but jealousy is a strange and insidious thing. It starts as a whisper, a fleeting thought dismissed as paranoia. Then it grows, feeding on every look, every word, until it becomes an unrelenting roar in the back of your mind. I tried to ignore it, to bury myself in my work, in the small comforts of my workshop, but it was no use. The doubts followed me everywhere, a shadow I couldn't escape. One day, I decided to see for myself. Ellen had mentioned her usual errand time, so I found an excuse to be in the area, lingering near the bus stop where she often caught her ride. I stayed at a distance, careful not to be seen, and watched as she boarded the bus. From where I stood, I could see him, the man I'd heard so much about. Jack. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps in his late 40s, with an easy smile and an air of confidence that seemed to draw people in. Ellen greeted him warmly, her face lighting up in a way that made my stomach twist. They spoke briefly before she took her seat, their exchange punctuated by her laughter. I stayed long enough to see the bus pull away, then returned home, my mind churning with emotions I could barely process. I told myself there was nothing to it, that I was imagining things, but the image of their interaction played on a loop in my mind. First smile, his smile, the ease between them. It was too much to ignore. That evening, I tried to push the thoughts aside, burying myself in the familiar rituals of our quiet life. But as the days passed, my suspicions only grew. I started paying closer attention to Ellen's comings and goings, noting the times she left and returned, the excuses she gave, the subtle changes in her demeanor. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a man watching his life unravel one thread at a time. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. What if I was wrong? What if my doubts were nothing more than the product of my own insecurities, my fear of losing the stability I'd built my life around? But deep down, I knew the truth. It was there in the way she looked at me, in the distance that had crept into our conversations, in the laughter that no longer belonged to me. The storm I feared was no longer on the horizon. It was here, building strength with each passing day, and I could feel its weight pressing down on me, threatening to tear everything apart. For now, I could only wait, caught in the quiet chaos of my own suspicions, bracing myself for the inevitable. The uneasy routine of my days persisted, a thin veneer of normalcy stretched over a chasm of suspicion. Every morning, Ellen left for her errands, her demeanor so unchanged, so maddeningly calm, that I questioned my own sanity. Was I imagining things? Was my fear turning shadows into monsters? But I couldn't silence the nagging voice in my head, the one that urged me to uncover the truth. My nights were restless, plagued by dreams that mirrored my waking thoughts. Ellen's laughter rang in my ears. Her smile haunted me, but it was never directed at me. The distance between us, once so subtle, now felt insurmountable. I don't know what finally drove me to follow her. Perhaps it was the culmination of sleepless nights or the weight of unspoken questions. That day, I left the house shortly after Ellen, careful to keep my distance as I trailed her to the bus stop. She boarded as usual, and I followed in my car, staying far enough back to avoid drawing attention. The bus route was familiar, winding through quiet streets and busy intersections. I kept my focus sharp, my hands gripping the wheel as I anticipated her destination. When the bus finally stopped near a small, nondescript motel on the outskirts of town, my heart sank. Ellen stepped off with Jack close behind, their laughter carrying on the breeze as they walked together toward the entrance. I parked a short distance away, my pulse pounding in my ears. My rational mind screamed at me to leave, to turn back and preserve the fragile illusion of ignorance. But something deeper, something primal, drove me forward. I couldn't look away. I had to know. I moved quietly, sticking to the shadows as I approached the building. The door they entered was slightly ajar, and I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside. The hallway was dimly lit, the air thick with a mix of stale smoke and cheap cleaning products. Their voices reached me, muffled but unmistakable, coming from one of the rooms ahead. I crept closer, every step a battle between anger and despair. When I reached the door, I froze, my hand hovering over the handle. I knew what I would see, but the reality of it still felt like a distant nightmare. Summoning every ounce of courage, I pushed the door open. The scene before me was both exactly what I had feared and worse than I could have imagined. Ellen and Jack were tangled together on the bed, their movements intimate and unrestrained. The sheer betrayal of it hit me like a physical blow, a pain so deep it stole my breath. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The world narrowed to the sight of them, the sound of their gasps, the crushing weight of my own disbelief. Then they saw me. Ellen's face shifted from pleasure to horror, her eyes widening as she scrambled to cover herself. Jack froze, his expression a mixture of shock and guilt. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The words I wanted to say, the accusations, the demands for answers, all caught in my throat. Instead, I turned and walked away, my footsteps heavy with the knowledge that everything I'd built, everything I believed in, had been destroyed. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts raced, colliding with each other in a chaotic storm. Anger, sadness, betrayal, humiliation. They all fought for dominance, leaving me hollow and numb. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I felt as though I'd aged a decade. Inside the house, the silence was deafening. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing, my mind replaying the events over and over. The image of Ellen with Jack burned into my memory, a permanent scar that would never fade. I didn't know what would come next, but one thing was certain. The life I'd known was over. The storm I'd sensed for so long had finally arrived, and it had left nothing but devastation in its wake. The hours after my discovery passed in a haze. Ellen returned home late, her steps cautious as if she were trying to move unnoticed. She didn't look at me, didn't speak, but I could feel her presence, a tangible weight in the room. Her guilt hung thick in the air, yet she offered no explanation, no apology. That silence was all the confirmation I needed. I've always prided myself on being a rational man, a thinker rather than a reactor. But this betrayal was different. It wasn't just a crack in the foundation of our marriage. It was a complete collapse. I couldn't ignore it, couldn't forgive it, and most importantly, I couldn't let it go unanswered. Revenge was not a concept I had entertained before, yet now it consumed me. Every thought, every moment, was driven by the need to even the score, to make them both feel a fraction of the pain they had inflicted upon me. Ellen and Jack had destroyed my life. It was only fair that I return the favor. I began with Jack. He was the easier target, a man whose life was built on routine and predictability. I spent days observing him, learning his habits, his schedule, his weaknesses. He was confident, almost cocky, as if he believed himself untouchable. That arrogance would be his undoing. The first strike was subtle. I spread rumors about him within the community, careful to frame them as concerned whispers rather than outright accusations. Stories of his impropriety, his questionable character, began to circulate. It wasn't long before they reached his employer. When Jack's supervisor pulled him aside for a private conversation, I made sure to be nearby, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to anger to barely concealed panic. Next came the financial blow. I discovered that Jack had been skimming money from his side jobs, a secret he thought well hidden. It took little effort to gather evidence and anonymously tip off the authorities. The investigation was swift and the consequences severe. His accounts were frozen, his reputation further tarnished, and his future suddenly uncertain. Ellen, meanwhile, was not spared my wrath. I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I let my disdain manifest in smaller, more calculated ways. I stopped engaging with her entirely, leaving her to stew in the silence of a household that no longer offered her solace. Her attempts at conversation were met with cold indifference, her presence treated as an intrusion rather than a comfort. But the culmination of my revenge was yet to come. I needed something final, something that would leave no doubt in either of their minds about the consequences of their actions. I waited for the perfect moment, biding my time until an opportunity presented itself. It came on a chilly Friday evening. Jack had taken to drinking at a local dive bar, his troubles weighing heavily on him. I followed him as he stumbled out into the alley, his movements unsteady and his guard down. The darkness cloaked me as I approached, my footsteps silent, deliberate. He didn't see me until it was too late. My fist connected with his jaw, the force of the blow sending him sprawling to the ground. He tried to scramble to his feet, but I was relentless, years of pent-up frustration and betrayal fueling my every move. I didn't stop until he was begging for mercy, his voice hoarse and trembling. When I finally stepped back, my knuckles bloodied and my chest heaving, I felt a grim satisfaction. Jack was broken, both physically and emotionally, his arrogance replaced by fear. I left him there in the dirt, a shadow of the man he had once been, and returned home without a word. The storm inside me had not yet passed, but I knew the final reckoning was near. Ellen would face her own judgment soon enough, and when it came, it would be as unrelenting as the vengeance I had unleashed upon Jack. The aftermath of my encounter with Jack left me both exhilarated and empty. I had delivered my message, etched it into his bruises and shattered pride, yet the satisfaction was fleeting. The storm inside me still raged, and its next target was Ellen. For days, I waited, observing her with the same detached calculation I had used on Jack. She tried to pretend everything was normal, but I could see the cracks forming. Her laughter was hollow, her smiles forced, and her movements hesitant, as if she sensed the tempest brewing just beyond her reach. It was a Saturday afternoon when I decided the time had come. Ellen was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch, the scene so domestic it bordered on absurd. How many times had I watched her like this, her hands deftly chopping vegetables, her mind seemingly miles away, and yet, I had never felt further from her than I did in that moment. I didn't speak immediately, allowing the weight of my presence to settle in the room. She turned, startled to find me standing there, and for a brief moment, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. It was quickly replaced by her usual mask of composure, but I had caught it, and it was enough. I placed a single envelope on the counter between us, its contents meticulously prepared. Photographs, printed copies of messages, and even a receipt from the motel. Evidence of her betrayal laid bare. Ellen's hands trembled as she opened it, her face draining of color with every piece of damning proof she pulled out. Still, I said nothing, letting the silence speak for me. When she finally looked up, her eyes filled with tears, I felt nothing but cold resolve. Whatever excuses she might offer, whatever apologies she might beg for, they would mean nothing to me now. I know everything, I finally said, my voice low and steady. There's no point in denying it. Ellen's lips parted, but no sound came out. She seemed to shrink before me, her defiance crumbling under the weight of my gaze. I stepped closer, the envelope still lying open between us like a wound that refused to heal. You made your choices, I continued, and now, you'll face the consequences. My plan for Ellen was not one of physical retribution, but of complete dismantling. Over the next weeks, I dismantled our life together piece by piece. I canceled shared accounts, withdrew funds from joint savings, and ensured that every financial tie we had was severed. She was left with nothing but her own guilt and the hollow shell of the life she had so eagerly betrayed. Ellen's attempts to reach out to me were met with cold indifference. She pleaded, wept, and even resorted to anger, but I remained unmoved. Every word she spoke only deepened my resolve. Every tear she shed only reminded me of the ones I had cried in silence. I was not interested in reconciliation. I wanted her to feel the same helplessness, the same devastation that she had inflicted on me. Jack, too, was not spared for my final act. I reported his improprieties to the local bus company, providing irrefutable evidence of his misconduct. The result was swift and unforgiving. He lost his job, his primary source of income, and with it, his sense of stability. The man who had once walked with such confidence was now reduced to a shadow of his former self, his arrogance replaced by desperation. As the days turned to weeks, I watched as both Ellen and Jack struggled to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Ellen moved out, her belongings packed hastily into boxes as she left the home we had shared for decades. Jack disappeared from town, his name becoming little more than a cautionary tale whispered among neighbors. And yet, as I stood in the empty house, the echoes of our past life surrounding me, I felt no joy, no triumph. Revenge had been my fuel, but it was not the balm I had hoped for. The wounds remained, raw and unhealed, a constant reminder of what had been lost. In the end, I realized that revenge, no matter how calculated or satisfying in the moment, could never truly fill the void left by betrayal. It was a temporary salve, a way to reclaim control in a situation where I had felt powerless. But the scars it left behind were permanent, and they were mine to carry alone. The life I had known was gone, and in its place was a vast, empty expanse. It was up to me to decide what to do with it, how to rebuild and move forward. For now, though, I allowed myself the silence, the stillness, and the faint hope that someday, the storm inside me would finally subside. The days had grown colder, and the house, now empty of Ellen's presence, felt cavernous and silent. I had spent weeks in contemplation, wrestling with the storm of emotions that lingered after the acts of vengeance I'd unleashed. Yet, there was still a lingering ache, a weight that would not lift. The final reckoning had to happen, not just for them, but for me. I tracked Jack down to a small, dilapidated rental on the outskirts of town. He had disappeared after losing his job, his reputation shredded, and his finances drained. But I knew he was still there, licking his wounds and hiding from the wreckage of his life. It was a late evening when I arrived, the sky painted in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. I parked a short distance away and approached on foot, the crunch of frost beneath my boots muffled by the surrounding trees. The house was barely more than a shack, its windows darkened and the air around it heavy with desolation. It suited him perfectly. I knocked once on the door, a sound sharp and commanding in the stillness. When the door opened, Jack's face appeared in the dim light, gaunt and hollow, his arrogance stripped away. For a moment, he didn't recognize me, but when realization dawned, his eyes widened with a mixture of fear and anger. Without a word, I stepped inside, forcing him to retreat. The room was sparsely furnished, the air thick with the stale scent of unwashed clothes and spilled liquor. Jack stammered something, but I cut him off with a glare that silenced him. There would be no worse tonight, no chance for him to explain or excuse himself. I took my time, surveying the pitiful state of his existence, before turning my full attention to him. He tried to maintain his composure, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. I could feel the tension radiating off him, his unease growing with every passing second. And then I struck. My fist connected with his jaw, the impact sending him staggering back into a rickety chair that collapsed under his weight. He scrambled to his feet, but I was relentless, each blow fueled by months of betrayal and anger. The fight, if it could even be called that, was one-sided. Jack was no match for the fury I had kept bottled up for so long. By the time I stepped back, Jack was slumped against the wall, his breaths ragged and shallow. Blood trickled from his nose and mouth, his face a mask of pain and defeat. I stood over him, my own knuckles bruised and throbbing, and for the first time in months, I felt a measure of peace. "You took everything from me," I said, my voice low and steady, "and now you know what it feels like." I left him there, a broken man in a broken home, and walked out into the crisp night air. The stars above were sharp and cold, their light piercing the darkness like tiny shards of glass. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I took a deep breath and felt the weight begin to lift. When I returned home, the house still felt empty, but it no longer felt like a tomb. It was a blank slate, a place where I could rebuild and start anew. Ellen was gone, Jack was defeated, and I was free. The scars of betrayal would remain, but they would not define me. As I sat in the quiet of my living room, the faint scent of raspberries lingered in the air, a bittersweet reminder of the past. It was Ellen's favorite jam, the one she had always made from scratch every autumn. I smiled grimly, knowing that I would never taste it again, but also knowing that it no longer mattered. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape forever changed. And in that silence, I found the first faint whispers of hope. And that's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this journey, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories like this one. Got thoughts or experiences you'd like to share? Drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.